Hi everyone, welcome back. Time for the next session. We're talking data analysis and consumer behavior. Lots to get through into this one, especially given some of the other things we've already spoken about today. So really looking forward to this one. You will know Ganesh Subramanian from Stylumia and Daina from Bold Metrics from the first session of the day. Also joining us, Claudiu Clement, who's a senior e-commerce consultant from e-Comas, who's going to be giving a technical perspective on this as well. So as always, please keep your questions coming in the comments section. As soon as you think of them, just pop them in there and I'll ask them to them throughout the session. But look, let's get this one going. Claudiu, I think the best thing to start would be with you and maybe give a quick introduction to the audience.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So hi, everyone. My name is Claudiu. I'm a senior e-commerce consultant for e-Comas. e-Comas is a full service agency based out of Luxembourg. We have people everywhere, all over Europe. We have people based in US as well, people based in India. The way we approach projects is usually starting with consulting projects. Brands come to us and they usually have questions such as, should I develop my business in new channels? Should I start new channels? Should I go on Amazon? How big is the business on Amazon? What is the size of the price? Should I go 1P? Should I go 3P? After we answer these questions, what we usually do is we have an operations team, which is account management and advertising. So we cover the 360-degree area of the business. Now, a bit about myself. I started my career as an e-commerce consultant back in 2015, started my own businesses as well. Now, also, I had a period of about 2 or 3 years in management consulting. Now, also in 2018, I started my PhD in statistics, which, by the way, I'm about to finish in about 2 weeks. So my take on today's webinar will be mostly around technical data and specifically on e-commerce. I'm looking forward to having a fruitful discussion. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Fantastic. Well, look, good luck in your PhD, and I'm sure you're going to provide some really good insights on this call. So let's get stuck in to this and open it up to the first question, which is what kind of data can be analyzed to further understand the reasons behind returns specifically. Who wants to come in? I see Ganesh. Go on, Claudiu, you're straight in there. I love it. Go on.
I can go. I absolutely love this question because, as I said, I had a couple of e-commerce businesses myself. One of them was actually a bicycle business. As you can imagine, having returns for bicycles is really, really painful. And it's actually very similar to buying a car. So a bicycle loses its value on the first client about 30%. So it's really, really painful. I want to make sure that people from apparel, which we all know that is the industry with the highest return rates, I want to have some kind of relief to them that there's industries that can have it very, very or more difficult than this. Now, what's my take on data, what we can get to understand more about returns? I will be mostly speaking about my expertise in marketplaces. As we know, especially on apparel, there's 2 reasons for returns. There's something is called bracketing. I'm pretty sure people in apparel industry know about it, which is people buying multiple sizes or buying multiple colors of the same product. So that's one thing. Then there's wardrobing, in which people buy a product, they go to a wedding or a party, and then they just return it back. Okay, so my take will be in trying to figure out how can we understand some details about this. Now, what you can do, for example, on Amazon is basket analysis, and you can actually see, well, did this customer or do customers in general buy products that are the same parent product, so different colors or different sizes. This is the first thing that we can learn out of this, and it's usually helpful to see if bracketing happens for some of your products. Now, on the other side, on Amazon as well, you have reasons for why customers are returning your product. So you have specific details about why customers are returning the products. Now, obviously, this is great data. As far as I know, some of the brands in D2C don't really collect this, and I highly encourage them to collect the reasons for why customers are returning the product. It may be tricky, of course. Sometimes they may not be super specific into the reasons, or may just feel something that's not necessarily insightful for the brand. But usually, that's kind of how it works, at least on the marketplaces. And also something that I would like to emphasize here is the return experience is usually super, super helpful. Now, this is because return is actually an opportunity, especially for a D2C brand, to build loyalty. Okay, so the way the whole return experience is, that's your chance to actually keep this client and make sure he or she comes back with another purchase, making sure that they can easily return the products that they bought. So that's kind of my take on this. Another thing that I'm thinking on is using natural language processing or using sentiment analysis on the reviews. This can also be helpful in extracting some of the reasons, if they mention in the reviews why they were not very happy with the purchase. So these are kind of main three things from my experience that you can learn from the data.
Yeah, I can go next. I'll just start with my e-commerce experience before. I used to run a D2C large fashion multi-brand retailer in this part of the world, India. Many a times when a customer wants to return something, we ask them to give a reason. In your app, they will have to do a drop down and select which reason. There are predefined reasons which are given. And when we used to analyze this data, and what we saw was size is one of the big reasons why people wanted to return. You'll be surprised when we went few levels down, because our customer call center were actually interacting with consumers who are returning. This is in the early stages of evolution. And the reason that the size was picked, because that was the first option. Surprising that when customers select something, we should not assume that's the truth, right? Therefore, we need to get one level deeper, because it's easy for them to choose, right? It's not that size is not a big reason. It was a big reason, but it was magnified much more than what it was in reality. So that's one. And when we analyze the data on what's happening. Second is, we did something different. I'm sure maybe others are doing, but at that time it was very unique. When we realized that size was one of the big reasons, if you just look at the footprint of a return, imagine that the product goes, customer does not like, he or she wants to return. It comes entire path back to warehouse. And then they will have to place the new order. There is a new order processing, and then the goods have to move again on this way, right? Now, what we realized was that we can cut down the entire logistics and ease for the consumer by giving what is an exchange option. And exchange option is something very easy, because they like the style, they like the color, everything else, but just not size. So we could actually send a replacement size immediately, right? In case the consumer is not ordering multiple sizes. There are a lot of consumers who actually guessed this size will fit me, but they didn't order multiple sizes. But we offered an exchange option where in one click, an order was automatically generated, and when they deliver, the return also got picked up. So I think, how do we make the life easier for the consumer in case there is a mismatch between size they thought would fit and vis-a-vis what is not there? And the third thing is, how do we gather intelligence beyond what a brand is doing? How do you learn from the crowd? Because others are making mistakes, and how do we learn from that? I think one is, we provide intelligence of, for example, maybe your style is having a lot of return, but a similar competition style is not having it. Now, how would you learn from others, right? Therefore, we collect data across brands and retailers, including the reviews, text that, Claudiu was talking about, where we can understand what are the reasons why people return, what's working for others and what's not working for you. And you can do this for your own data. You could also do it for others. How do you have collective intelligence and improve the overall, quality of returns and the quantum of returns?
And then just to jump in here as well, by the way, I'm Daina. I'm the CEO of Bold Metrics. And at Bold Metrics, we think a lot about returns. It's one of our main areas that we look to make an impact on, and reducing returns by helping consumers find the right size, by connecting their body, capturing their body data, their body measurements, and relating it to the products that they're looking to make a purchase on. And so we analyze returns data all the time. It's part of our system of machine learning on the purchase and returns data, so we can continuously learn over time. And I can say that from our experience, it's not actually surprisingly quite adopted for collecting reason codes yet. Not all brands and retailers are doing that. So I think number one, having just like a reason code and collecting that digitally. So there is still behavior where brands will collect reason codes, but it'll be like literally on a piece of paper that you include in the returns package. And which is nice, but what we found is putting into practice, that data is then just lost because you need a person to actually like collect that like physical checkbox data essentially. So employing a method to have return reason codes collected in a digital format is huge. And we're still waiting to see, more broad adoption of just like digital reason code collection, by the way. So that's a big one. But beyond that, of course, once you have those reason codes, that's useful, but you can even dig in deeper on reason codes. So for us, of course, we're in the area of sizing and fit and how to improve sizing and fit for a brand and how to improve understanding of how consumers are fitting into the sizes that they're purchasing. And so we know from returns analysis that size tends to be the dominant reason for a return occurring, whether it's bracketing or just, purchasing the wrong size to begin with. But you can go beyond that and glean from insights by merging data that you can bring in from the consumer data side of things to understand beyond just, majority of time it's fit, but what about the fit is off. And so something that we look at is merging the consumer body measurement data with the returns data. So tracking a purchase through to returns so we can identify that unique user, what their captured body measurements are. And if the return is due to fit, we can start to glean insights as to certain sizes, maybe that could be off a little bit on the technical design of the patterns. Providing these insights upstream for technical designers to be able to have a feedback loop system into how their products are fitting. So there's a lot you can unpack in returns data. And from our perspective, zeroing in on the sizing and fit related elements of returns.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to that, David, one is about one thing we did was in the PDP page when the consumer was navigating, how do we prevent this, right? Can we help them order the right size? For one thing we did, which had a huge impact, was because we are a multi-brand platform and consumers are used to some brands and they already know what fits for them. If they're experimenting a new brand, we asked to ask the reference brand and say, are you comfortable in any other brand and what size fitted you there? So we used to then quickly recommend what's the right size in this brand that should fit you using data science, because we had all the measurements of all of these brands. The other thing that we did as a retailer was that when brands gave us products, they used to give a standard measurement chart, right? What does size mean? SML, XL, and various body measurements or garment measurements. And when we actually measured we used to measure most of these styles in the warehouse. We actually went and gave a lot of feedback to the brand saying that what you're actually telling us and what we see in reality, there is a huge difference, right? And then we worked with our partners to bring the difference down so that we don't need to do that heavy lifting, right? And using that accurate data, relatively accurate data of the garment measurements, we were able to suggest better sizes for the consumers while they are at the PDP page.
What I would like to add here, I think sorry, Daina. I think what's important here as well is to split the bracketing and the simple practice of only ordering one product, because even if someone, for example, does bracketing, so orders 2 pairs of jeans, okay? Now they order 2 different sizes. There's gonna be a question asking them, okay, why do you want to return one of the pairs of the jeans, right? So they're gonna say, well, size is wrong. But actually, it's just the practice that they have, that they usually order 2 sizes because they're not really sure. They maybe didn't really investigate that much what the size chart is and so on. So I think we have to split these two. Is it a demographic that we have that usually does bracketing, or is it maybe that actually the product has a fit, let's say, glitch in it, or maybe just the client can't really understand the size chart pretty well. So I think this is also something that needs to be accounted for.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, bracketing is often an indication that there is confusion around what size to buy, right? I mean, I guess that's I would say that would be the dominant reason. If someone's buying multiple sizes of the exact same style and color, they're not sure about their size. And Ganesh is totally correct. Size charts are often wrong. They're very confusing. We talked a little bit about it on the previous panel that sometimes they show garment measurements, sometimes they show body measurements, and it's often not clear what those numbers are representing, whether it's garment or body, because that's very different. And people don't know their body measurements. Like, do you know your hip circumference, for example? Most people do not. So that's, just a very unhelpful tool to puzzle over. So you end up buying multiple sizes, which is, an automatic return in a sense. So, and I should add to like the challenge though, because it was mentioned of, comparing brand sizes and brands. The challenge with that from our perspective of working with brands is it's really actually common for someone to be multiple sizes within a brand based on that style, because fits are different and fit preferences change based on what type of garment you're wearing, etc. So it's less helpful to say I'm a size medium in one brand and therefore that translates overall this whole brand in any product to size medium, because we often see that people can be usually at least 2 sizes, sometimes even 3 sizes within that brand, depending on the style. And so taking an approach of understanding that consumer's body measurements and relating it to that very specific style that they're looking to make a purchase on is more helpful to surface, their understanding of how it's going to fit across their critical points of measure, and relating that fit preference to them so that they can make that informed purchase decision and hopefully not have to purchase multiple sizes. Because at the end of the day, I mean, who likes to process a return personally? Like, no one wants to get 2 sizes and send one back. It's a thing that you need to do, and you have to do it within a certain time period and all that. So much better to make everyone's life easier by providing intelligent tools for consumers to have an easier experience and not be puzzling over bizarre size chart numbers.
I think it's very interesting here. There seems to be some debate as to how much is bracketing, how much is wrong size. I don't know what you can do about wardrobing, as you said, Claudiu. At the beginning, perhaps that's a practice that will always take place until you charge for returns, which I believe Zara started doing quite famously in the last 6 months or so. How do you improve that reliability of data? Because as you said, if size was the first option on your drop-down list, Ganesh, certainly when we ask people, how did you hear about this event that we've run, email is often the first option on there, and you'll be, I think it's about 85% or something. And I hope it's not 85%, because, we do a lot of marketing in different ways. So in terms of how do you improve that reliability of data, can you ever trust the drop-down list, or is it that there are other data sets that you have to analyze? Like Claudiu said, obviously if people have bought 2 of the same item in a different color, you can say it's not because they're getting the wrong size, it's because they don't trust the size measurements, as you said, Daina. And is that a problem that can even be fixed? Can we ever get to a place where one trusts these sizing measurements of different companies, knowing that there's no standardization in this area? Let's think about it from the consumer standpoint. If we're trying to provide feedback to companies like the brands, and in turn Boldmetrics or Stylumia, or you guys, in terms of the data and analytics side of things, what's their journey there, and how can we make it a simple process for them to provide that clear data set for you guys to then improve the sizings charts and information provided to them? Do you know what I mean? It's a long question. I appreciate that. Claudiu, I'm going to ask you to come in on that.
Right. Well, okay. What I'm thinking here is that this is not necessarily super specific to the apparel industry, and the problem with the sizing chart is typically a data science problem. So usually data science or data analytics teams, you have to distinguish the noise from the actual signal, right? So I'm not an expert in any means in sizing charts and body measurements and so on, but I would say it shouldn't be a problem that's too difficult, being it that you address it as a typical data science problem. And there's more difficult issues than just figuring out what the right sizing chart should be for the consumers. Definitely, this is not an easy one, but I just want to have my take on this one, that I think if the data science team is solid enough and the approach is the right one, I don't see too many issues with addressing this one. So that will be my take.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question, which is all about how can the collection and analysis of body measurement data, be leveraged to understand consumer habits. So, I mean, it's a similar one, but we're talking more about their habits, their behaviors now. So, Daina, if you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. So what we do is we're often like on a product display page, and we interface with the consumer when they're trying to determine what size they are. And in that process, we capture body measurements of that consumer in a really easy way for consumers to interact with, so they don't have to pull out a measuring tape or take pictures of themselves or anything, so they can do it while sitting on the subway. And then we track that purchase along with their body measurements through to returns. And so this provides a continuous feedback loop in the system so that we can really start to understand a variety of different things. We can understand how consumers are interacting with the products from a fit and sizing perspective. And if we're seeing certain sizes or certain styles have higher returns than others, we could really start to dive into reasons for that from a body measurement perspective and how it relates to the actual pattern and technical design of that product. And so this data can be hugely valuable upstream within a brand, within their technical design, so that they have this continuous feedback loop as to, if they recently just defined new sizing gradation and they release that to the market. Now there's a way to have, other than ratings and reviews and comments left by customers, a tangible, actionable insight related to body measurements and the purchase and returns behavior, so that this data can be further inferred to improve sizing for those products. So I think that feedback loop is something that body measurements can really help to be leveraged within product design, so we have better fitting products. Because actually, like going back to the issue of returns, can, from our perspective on fit and sizing, have two kind of challenges. One is communicating fit and sizing to the consumer in a way that's trustworthy, and we touched upon that a little bit too. And the second is, are we creating the right sizing, from a technical perspective, from a gradation design and from a pattern design perspective as well? Because you can, create your sizing pattern gradation schema, and it could just not have a very good fit coverage to the market that you're selling towards. And so even if you're really good at communicating your fit and sizing to the consumer, if the sizing is not adequate for the demographic or geographical population that you're selling to, for example, or the segment that you're selling to, then there's a mismatch there. So the issue of returns from a sizing and fit perspective can be looked at from those two approaches. So better tools for the consumer, but also a feedback loop system for technical design, so that we create better fitting products before they hit the market, and can have a continuous feedback loop system to improve the fit of those products over time.
Claudiu, do you want to come in on that?
Right. So what I'm thinking, definitely Daina here has a lot more experience than I do in the body measurements area. But what I'm thinking here is, I think there can be correlations made between, for example, fit preference and simply the body measurements that the company has. So if an app, for example, measures your body and it addresses the need and it says, okay, this should be a good fit for you. And then the customer returns it. You may simply understand that, okay, so they have a different fit preference for that product. And this in large volumes of data can definitely tell you something about the demographics of some specific areas, for example. So this would be also helpful, as Daina said, for understanding, okay, so what is the reason for return? Is it not a good fit, or maybe is there something else that's behind the return? So that's kind of my short take on this one.
Okay, Ganesh?
Yeah, I have actually one question for Daina, and also observations on many a times what consumers say. And see, sometimes they might buy something and they would say that they didn't like the color, right? They will return, right? I think it's not all measurement related, because digitally it was looking different. When I saw it, it's a different tone of red right now. Therefore, that's one. And the question on size, I'm yet to find out, maybe I'm not aware, but I think Daina, you would know it better, is about, is there a preventive way of making customers choose the right one? Because that's the best way right now. I'm just thinking aloud, saying that, for example, eyewear today is already getting into virtual reality, where you can wear it, you can see it, you can feel it, and then you order, right? For whether the round shape is fitting you very well or whatever, cat eye, whatever. Now, is there a way that a virtual avatar or something can be created of a customer where it's virtually draped what I'm buying real time? And I know the heat map, and it recommends, it's perfect for you, right? It'll be tight here, loose there. Is there something that where it's in real time, consumer can actually feel as if they're testing it in a trial room?
Thanks, Ganesh. Well, yeah. So first thing on the reason codes, reasons for returns, absolutely. There are all different reasons for returns. Color is a big one. Products damaged, changed my mind, wasn't what I was expecting. And then from our findings, when we first start working with brands, that the sizing is often a dominant reason, or the majority reason. And that can range from like 50%, sometimes as high as like 75, 80%. So really depends. But I agree, there's all kinds of different reasons for returns. And then, on the virtual avatar and visualization. So I'm glad you mentioned it, actually, because it can loop back towards the other question earlier of consumer trust too. Because the generation of an avatar and like draping of clothing is actually really complex from a consumer perspective, because of the issues that you have to deal with when it comes to the uncanny valley of avatars. So uncanny valley is the further likeness you get towards a human, the likeness, or the kind of like likability of that visualization drops off really steeply. So you can have like something cartoony and it's likable, but then once it gets almost like the more close to human reality, the likability of that visualization drops off like very, very steeply and quickly. And so this uncanny valley of likability of avatar is like a very tricky thing that I think the whole community of virtualization of avatars and virtual dressing room environments, we all struggle with that, because once you have to deal with this kind of likability factor, it directly relates to how a consumer would trust that visualization. And so you don't want to like turn off the consumer with showing them like perhaps a very realistic view of their avatar, and they're like, oh, like I don't like how that looks, and it might be, but you don't also want it to be too cartoony, because then it doesn't feel like it's useful or valuable. So it's really hard. And I don't think anyone actually knows the answer to it definitively. And I think it's a really fascinating space. I can say that I do believe, as we're moving more and more towards Web3 and utilizing perhaps our future consumer experiences within these Web3 applications, I think we will start to unpack the complexities of the virtual dressing room problem in this uncanny valley, so that, and I do believe the future of how we convey fit to consumers is going to be more dominantly visual. But there's some significant challenges that we still have to figure out. And it truly relates back to consumer trust of that result, of that visualization.
Great point. Something for me to research on. Very interesting. Never realized avatar. There is a psychology behind avatars.
Is it the same? Because Ganesh, mentioned about sunglasses. So when you do sunglasses or just eyewear, you basically see yourself. Do you have any data if that has an impact on the person, or is mostly on the lower body, let's say, that's impacting the psychological part of the decision?
I think it's both. It doesn't actually matter on the. So yeah, just you could research Uncanny Valley. It's a really fascinating topic, and you might find yourself reading about it for a while. But you can look at some of the graphs of how it depicts what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, because you might have experience looking at a face of an avatar that's you're trying to create an avatar that looks like you, but doesn't quite look like you, and it's a little bit like uncomfortable almost. Yeah, so it's like the psychological likability or connection to that viewpoint. But then if it's more cartoony, it's more likable, but less like you. So it is quite a challenge for sure, but it is fascinating, and definitely the dominant area that I think anyone that works with avatars and visualizations is keen to keep an eye on as to how that progresses and how consumer adoption of these views will change and evolve over time.
This would be a perfect thing, right? You could see yourself walking through any store in any clothing, running, doing all of these sorts of different things. I think the interesting thing with the Uncanny Valley is certainly because all humans are, when you go into the detail, are asymmetrical. We are not symmetrical beings. If you mirrored your face, you would look very strange. So we're all very asymmetrical beings, and often when you're doing these visualizations, you're basically creating a symmetrical face. And so when you speak to someone like Cameron James Wilson, who founded The Digitals, who is the digital modeling agency for Shudu, who's sort of one of the most prominent digital supermodels. That was one of the things that when he was creating someone was the key thing for him was creating these imperfections. And it's very difficult to do that. And that's why what he does is so great. I think also with that, when you have your face on an avatar as well, you then get into, that is your identifying feature, certainly even to open your phone now as well. So it becomes a really personal bit of information that not a lot of people want to share. And it's funny because actually with this, we don't really care about what people look like, but actually we just want the avatar to be an interesting game for someone to use to enable them to buy more goods, right? So actually we don't care what they look like, but they do have to look like something. They can't just have a cartoon face. The thing that we really care about here is the body shape and the body size, and how we collect and use that data and how that informs someone's habits. So it's a really, really interesting space. I think the impact of soft body tissue as well is another area that's really difficult in terms of virtual fit and virtual avatars as well. So some really, really interesting areas there for people to maybe do their own research, as Ganesh said. But let's keep it focused on the data analysis and consumer behavior for apparel goods. And a general question here, but I think it's a good one. Let's talk about some of the challenges that apparel brands face when it comes to their e-commerce data in general, not just about sizing and fit, but can include sizing and fit. So Claudiu, I'm going to come to you. Data, Mr. Data. What are some of the challenges that apparel brands specifically face with regards to this in general?
Of course, thanks, David. So I think it's part of the challenges that most companies now face nowadays, and it's especially in making sense of the data. I've been joining the previous spotlight, and Tiffany said, well, how can we get the so what out of data? So I think that's the biggest challenge. Now, there's obviously platforms in which you have an abundance of data, and there's platforms in which you don't have that much data. But assuming you have a big amount of data, the most important topic here is how can you make sense of it? There's, of course, the issue with the resources. You don't really have enough data scientists. You don't have enough data analysts and so on. So there's definitely these issues. But I will walk you through 4 steps typically in data analysis. So you have collect, you have normalize, you have blend, and then you have visualize. Now, for some companies, even collecting the data is difficult because you have multiple endpoints. You don't know how to take it from there. Maybe, for example, there's some marketplaces in Europe, they don't have an API. So how do I get data? How do I get all this knowledge that I have or that I can get my hands into from these sources? Now, after you get the data, then the question is, how do I normalize it? How do I make sure that data coming, for example, from my D2C, from 6 marketplaces, and from all these sources can be put into a database, and that's nice and clean and is ready for analysis. And then you blend it, and you should have some KPIs already that the visualization team should put in place for people to have decision making. But I think along all these 4 steps, typically brands have issues. We're currently working on a project now in which we're trying to get as close as possible to an ideal dashboard that blends data from all these sources and that does all these 4 steps. Now, although we have the experience, especially in e-commerce with all kinds of brands, it's still difficult for us to come closer to an ideal dashboard with all these things that I mentioned. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge nowadays, especially for the marketing people, is how do you attribute your advertising spend? Now, Amazon has a new tool now. It's called Amazon Marketing Cloud, in which you should be able to get more knowledge than usual about the consumer's journey, but it typically is super difficult for brands to make attribution for the advertising spend. They have a campaign, let's say big campaign on a classic TV, and then you don't know if these people actually turn out and they buy on Amazon. How do I attribute the spend that I have on TV on the sale that was closed on Amazon or on my D2C? So these are some of the things that make it very, very challenging. Now, of course, there's the security issues that most brands are facing nowadays, meaning that they really have to make sure that there's no data breach. And the data, after they have all this data collecting, and hopefully it sits nice into a database, if it's there, how do I make sure that it's not going to be attacked by hackers? I'm not going to have any data leakage and so on. So these are some of the challenges I see, especially for the apparel and I'd say brands in general with their e-commerce data.
Thanks, Claudiu. Really detailed there. Ganesh, you've been dealing with this for a number of years. What are some of the main challenges that people face?
Yeah, I'll start with, what is the purpose of data right now? What do you do with all of this data? You really want to create an outcome. The outcome is that, for example, I want to grow my business. I want to maybe grow my profits. I want to turn around my capital much faster, right? With whichever marketplace or retailer that I'm working with, right? Now, I really want to give, from an e-commerce perspective, I think Claudiu will know that in e-commerce, a product is penalized for visibility on availability much stronger than offline retail, right? What I mean by that is, in an offline retail, imagine out of 4 sizes, 2 sizes go out. You are still in the same shelf space. You are still visible as a product. But if you go to e-commerce space, they kill you, right? So as a product, 2 sizes go out of stock, you're pushed down because of consumer experience. No retailer wants to show something for which 50% of the sizes are not available. For now, the question therefore is, what data can I have that I can get to the top of potential performance of my products? The second is, there is a power law which applies in the algorithm of most of these retailers, which means that very few products get the maximum visibility, right? For there are numbers like in some of the leading platforms, so you would see that first 1 page is close to 40-50% of business. It's almost like saying, how can I come on the first page of this retailer? Now, the question is, what will make me get my products appear on the first page? Now let's look at these as a business problem to say, what data would help me reach there, right? For one is to say that I think, how do I ensure that my availability is always good? Let's assume that you're making some products. I think my suggestion would be that availability is one of your key metrics that you should track and ensure that you have good availability. Now, once you have availability at SKU level, the second is, are we even making the right products? For example, if your products are going to sit in the mediocre space on visibility, right? And there are lots of other people doing better than you, how can you learn from them? Now, this is not a data that you have. Everybody's bothered about collecting their own data from multiple platforms, aggregate. Now, that itself is a challenge. I completely agree with Claudiu, because it's so much of, the way that data comes, and the format in which the data come, that's a challenge by itself. But just by analyzing your own data, you're not going to hit the top of the page, because you yourself are not there in the top of the page. Just by analyzing the middle, how will you get there? For you need to analyze how the market is, right? For you can only become better of you right now, but you can't become better of the market. To do that, you need external intelligence, which is to say, what are consumers appreciating in the market? Therefore, multi-brand platforms offers an opportunity of competitive insights. And that's one area that we contribute to brands and retailers, brands in particular, to say what works in this platform that which you don't have. Now, how do you decode that? Therefore, we built a proprietary engine of demand sensing the market. For let's say if somebody says that I really want to know what's happening in this retailer in Germany, what kind of women's dresses actually do well, what are their attributes, what are their price ranges, what are the features of these products, what are the white spaces that I should enter into. So I think constantly one needs to be vigilant, because if you're not in the top few pages, you're going to be playing a long tail game. It's not going to be productive, right? And of course, you can throw marketing money on top of this, etc. But I think they can only take you that far. So I just want to say product is the hero. If you have an average product, you can throw whatever money on top of it. It can't reach beyond a point. I think, how do you make the right products, right? And then use all of this data, not just your data. I think the key point I'm making is you need to have the data of the ecosystem. So you need to have alternate data to understand how do you fit in the overall market, and use that intelligence to take actions on product and, of course, on the other areas on marketing to push yourselves up in the ecosystem.
Absolutely, Ganesh. And one of the small thing that I want to mention here is, for example, because as I mentioned at the beginning, brands come to us and then ask us, well, can you tell us what my competition is doing, for example, on the digital shelf of Amazon? What's super interesting is you can see so much only from advertising. For example, you're looking for, let's say, jeans, okay? The color that your competitor brand is actually pushing is most probably the bestseller color that they have. So this is one of the things that you can already see. So these guys are selling, let's say, black jeans. Okay, that's why they're pushing. There's no reason for them to push on advertising a pair of jeans that no one buys, right? So this is so quick, and it's it's available for everyone. And it's usually something, although it's little, it's something that can make a big difference, especially for brands that want to push new products. They have zero data, or they have no knowledge about how to approach it. So that's kind of a little thing I want to add here.
No, absolutely.
And I'll just add on to that, just in agreement with what Ganesh mentioned, is what is the outcome of the data? Honestly, that's the most important. There's so much data being collected, but it's kind of useless unless you have something actionable to take on that. Of course, we're in the business of fit and sizing, so we work pretty hard to make returns data actionable from a fit and sizing perspective. So instead of just collecting your returns and that the number, but like, what can you add to that returns data? What can you pair with it? In this case, like body data, consumer purchase behavior relating to returns, to create actionable insights onto a better understanding as to the fit of your products, what needs to be improved, what's working, what's not working. And then as far as like the competitive environment, we've had brands that we work with interested in understanding the fit coverage as it relates to body data with their sizing compared to other brands in the space that address the same market from that perspective. And so I think that's also very interesting. Like, is your sizing kind of competitive and comparable to other products on the market? Or are you losing out to a certain cohort or a significant cohort perhaps because the sizing's off, but this other dominant competitive space has a better address for that demographic. So that's something that's also really interesting. There's ways that you can slice and dice into the competitive environment from a fit and sizing perspective too, once you start to think about the network effect of gaining access to body data in a broader sense.
Interesting. Daina, do you have a take on the difference in consumer behavior between marketplace consumer behavior and direct-to-consumer consumer behavior? And this is one of the points that we wanted to bring up today.
Yeah. So when you say marketplace, I think automatically like a multi-brand retailer versus direct to consumer, like an actual, like a brand selling to their consumers. And so from the fit and fun sizing perspective, a multi-brand retailer has a really big challenge with sizing, right? Because you have all these different brands that you are providing. And often it's really common for there to be just really not adequate support for fit and sizing for consumers in a multi-brand site versus, of course, like a brand selling directly to their customers has a bit more control there and can have more control in terms of like the size chart that's, being displayed, for example. And so with the marketplace, you have that added challenge. And so I think there's even more of a reason to think deeply about what is your consumer's experience around fit and sizing and what can we do to improve that experience so that their only tool is essentially, an inaccurate size chart or maybe no size chart is really common on marketplaces. And so thinking more deeply about that and addressing the consumer's need to have some sort of consultation around fit that's going to be reliable, trustworthy, accurate, and not confusing. And so I think marketplaces in particular have a very critical need to do something there. And I think there can still be a lot more done than what's being done today. So it's a particular challenge of marketplaces.
Claudiu or Ganesh, either of you want to jump in on this? Any big differences in behavior from what you've seen?
Yeah, I'll share. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ganesh. Go ahead.
That was inevitable when I said both of your names, isn't it? Ganesh, let's start.
Okay, thank you. I'll share my perspective as a retailer. When I was a retailer, share a best practice. One of the global brands, they used to demand a lot of data from us. We used to have so many brands, and we could see how brands interact with the retailer. Some people are happy with whatever we give. Some will come back and demand and say, tell me which consumers are buying my products. Tell me what's the distribution of my sales by zip code. Right? Now, if you can command respect with these retailers, I'm just saying first question is ask. Right? Ask everything as if it is D2C. They're just a channel partner. I think we should penetrate and ask as much information as possible. Therefore, we used to share a lot of information with this brand, and using that information, they used to make what I would call as channel-specific merchandising strategy. Which is to say that if I have 3 multi-brand retailers, they used to come back and say, here, focus category for you guys, considering all the data that we have, is this category. We are going to elevate this, and you will be a hero representation of this category. So I'll play a minor role here, major role here, and they go to the other retailer, they play a major role somewhere. By doing this, they used to have a very holistic market view. There's a reason why a consumer goes to retailer A and bought that brand, go to retailer B and bought that brand. If you just listen to the retailer and do whatever they want, I think we'll become a good mix of everything. So I think I just want to share that perspective, because understanding consumer behavior starts with understanding the data. And not all retailers are very transparent. Beyond a point, you may not get L2, L3 data, but I think good to ask. And if you ask and gather, and of course, the next step is to analyze. And once you analyze, and if you see some patterns and positioning the brand in those retailers in a strategic way, will significantly help building a holistic view of the brand across all, both D2C and marketplace.
There's so many differences when we talk about D2C versus marketplaces. I'll stick to the main one, which is the conversion rate. Definitely the conversion rates tend to be higher on the marketplaces than they are on the D2Cs. Now, as we know, average conversion rate on D2C is 2, 3, 4%, maybe. On Amazon is 10 to 15%. Okay, now why that happens is because there's so much trust in the platform itself, as I mentioned, on the return policy. If you don't like it, you can just return it. So in terms of consumer behavior, you have to really keep this in mind that if you list your product on Amazon, you have a very high chance of converting. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, because being on a marketplace, as Daina mentioned, it's very challenging because someone searches for t-shirts it's not going to be your only brand t-shirt that's showing up. You're going to be on a digital shelf with maybe 10 or 20 different t-shirts. So you really have to prove yourself when you're going into the marketplace now. And also consumers are used with high quality product pages. It's not as easy as just listing your product and forget about it, hoping that it will rank higher. And as Ganesh said, if you don't make it on the first page, very unlikely that you're ever going to be making a sale on second page, third page, and so on. So this is something that brands have to keep in mind. Consumer behavior in general in marketplaces is different from this perspective. There's a lot of trust, but you have to gain it. You have to prove yourself on the marketplaces. Maybe a bit easier on the D2C, because if people are already there, most probably they already know about your brand, or they at least have a little some knowledge about the brand. So it might be a bit easier to go ahead with some product pages that are not necessarily best in class. But if you're in a marketplace, you really have to prove yourself and make sure that you take advantage of this high volume of traffic and of the high conversion rates that you can achieve there. So this is the main difference that I see in D2C versus marketplace. Also, something is, if you only talk about data, since this is a session about data, marketplaces generally, they were well known for not giving brands that much data. And it's obviously the first party versus second party, third party, and so on discussion. Now, what we found out super interesting, especially about Amazon in US, is that there's some demographics data that you can get out of your sale or out of your orders from your customers that you can't really get from your D2C website. And there's info such as what is the income for the consumers that you have on Amazon, or what is the level of education, or what is their age. And this kind of info, you don't really get it on your D2C unless you have very specific questions, or you use any kind of data providers that you're able to actually blend and make analysis of the data. So this image of marketplaces, of, well, they're not going to give me too much data, I don't have first party data, I can't really learn that much about my consumer. I think this is really becoming an old idea. It really proves that nowadays marketplaces, and it's not only Amazon, we have other marketplaces exactly with the approach that Ganesh mentioned. If you ask them, they're going to give it to you. It's not the case for Amazon. You have to stick with what they offer, because obviously they don't treat everyone individually. But with the smaller ones, especially in Europe, if you ask them, they're going to give you some data that you never imagined that you can actually get, and most of the times for free. So this is something quite interesting, and it kind of switches the vision of D2C versus marketplaces.
Thanks, Claudiu. We've got about 10 minutes left, so maybe just a little bit under. So let's come to the sort of final question I've got on my list and see if we might have time for a bit of Q&A. But Ganesh, is there anything broken in today's consumer research on products? And is there anything in the future trends that might bring those consumer insights into product development?
Yeah, today I think we see that a lot of brands and retailers, they're actually doing research. When they do research, they collect data. The point I want to make is data in itself is not great. I think the question we have to ask is, what does this data tell us? Now, I'll just give you one example, just fashion. 1 out of 2 products supplied in fashion don't sell at full price. And a fair amount, roughly 30% of them, go to landfill in the overall scheme of things. Now, what does that mean? If you just collect all of the data, let's say if we go to Amazon, we go to any platform and say, oh, this is the market data. This is the number of options they're having. This is their price mix and all of that. So what we are doing with that data is we are only seeing supply. So I just want to share with everybody that when you say I'm collecting a lot of data, I'm scraping data, I'm looking at all of this, you're looking at supply, which has 50% incorrect signal, right? So how do you remove the signal and the noise in this data is very, very important. Now, which means, and that's basically knowing the customer demand. If you knew customer demand of every single product, then you can find out what's the right data, what is the wrong data, right? For you really want to understand the behavior of, let's say, top few pages of products. Maybe also you want to know what's in the bottom, so you know what not to do, you know what to do. Now, how do you find that out? So what I'm saying is, I think that's one of the areas that we have built a proprietary engine, which is demand sensing the supply market. Basically, consumer research on an ongoing basis, on a perpetual basis, and provide that to brands for them to take an informed decisions. For the other area and other thing that which I'm sharing is that as a future, one could look at diverse data streams, just not e-com data, whether it's social, whether it is, as we go forward, maybe what's happening in the metaverse, right? Across various medium, how can we bring multiple data streams and find causation of what causes what, right? And now, for example, today in fashion business, the question is, oh, this is doing very well, but if I do this now, will it work for me? So there is a question of timing. Therefore, trend has a relevance on timing. Therefore, in the fashion industry, there is a question of, we did a recent check on how relevant of today's data for future. We did a prediction of 2021 data. Using that, we predicted color of 2022 to see, are we predicting colors? And we are able to get 85 to 90% accuracy on color forecast using the 21 reality data, right? So there is a fair amount of future signals which are available in today's data. For my suggestion is use as much of this data, partner with people who can help you with the data, and then take informed insights.
Thanks, Ganesh. And I think that leads us into probably taking everyone's sort of final thoughts. So if you're all right with that, I'm going to take that as yours. And Claudiu, I'm going to bring you in for some final thoughts on the data side of things.
Yeah, so I want to quickly answer this question. If there's anything broken in how consumers are researching their products, I don't know if there's anything broken into it. I think we just have to be aware of the fact that the way consumers are researching now is different than what it used to be in the past. It's not really the situation where people are going into Google, they type for something, and then that's how they get the knowledge about products. We all know now there's TikTok videos, there's Instagram, the people are using these platforms more and more to research about products. And it's just a shift. If it's broken or not, I think it's a very difficult thing to say, but I just want to highlight this, that, and also what Daina said, that with the Web3 coming in, I think we have to be aware that the way people will actually research for products will be completely different than what it used to be in the past. We just have to acknowledge this and see how do we adjust the way we do business based on these criteria. Now, to sum up on the data, again, I think it's super important that first of all, we make sure we get it, we collect it, we make sure it is accurate, and then make sense of it. It's not only just having data into a database, nice and shiny. I think it's this so what that's so common in consulting as a question. What does this mean to me? How can I make my products better? How can I help serve my customers better? And how can I actually grow my business or my brand out of the data that I have? I think this is my my summary on the discussion we had today.
Thanks, Claudiu. Appreciate it. And Daina, last but not least, your thoughts on both things, both final thoughts and the is it broken as a system?
Well, not to take up too much time, so I'll just say thank you for inviting me to the panel. Great discussion, I thought, today. I think my kind of takeaways from our talk and conversation is really like the outcome of the data, and the so what is the most important thing. We're all tracking towards this North Star of having this better consumer experience. I think layering in certain data in addition to the returns data from our perspective, the body measurement, fit and sizing stuff can really create marching towards, the objective of having better fitting products and also giving consumers the better experience around fit and sizing. And so, relating to what's broken, well, let's layer in some of this important information to provide a better feedback loop into the system of technical design, for example, and really create actionable insights from the data that we're collecting. So again, what is that? The so what of the data, the outcome of the data, and with the biggest thing in mind is creating a better consumer experience. So at the end of the day, nobody likes to process a return personally, right? So as you think of that, of course, you don't want to return something. It's an extra thing to do. So what can we do to make that easier for the consumer?
Fantastic final points. Daina, Claudiu, Ganesh, thanks so much. Another really enlightening session. It feels like quote of the day has been so what so far. But I think we all know what that really means. So it's really, really good. So thank you for that. Really, really interesting stuff. So appreciate your input.